Ornella Vanoni, one of Italy's most iconic and enduring voices, has died at the age of 91, Italian media reported Friday. What followed this announcement was not simply the passing of a celebrity but the quiet, collective exhale of a country that had grown up with her melodies drifting through kitchens, cafes, radios, theaters, and late-night streets. It felt as though Italy had lost not just a singer, but a familiar presence, someone who, across more than 6 decades, had woven herself so delicately into the emotional fabric of the nation that generations came to associate her voice with seasons of their own lives. The legendary singer passed away at her home in Milan following a cardiac arrest. The details were simple, but the emotional impact was anything but. Milan, the city where her story began, had once again become her final stage, holding her in the same familiar embrace it had offered to her as a young girl dreaming of the arts. Those close to her described her final moments as peaceful, surrounded by the intimate quiet of her home, the same environment where she had composed thoughts, rehearsed melodies, and reflected on a life lived with a rare combination of artistry, courage, and vulnerability. For someone who had performed on grand stages and in front of millions, it felt deeply poetic that her final breath belonged only to herself and the city she loved. Vanoni's career, which spanned more than 6 decades, made her a pillar of musica leggera, Italy's beloved popular music from the 1960s onward. Yet calling her merely a pillar almost undersells what she represented. She wasn't a fixture in the background. She was a shapeshifter, a voice that evolved with the times without ever losing its core identity. There was always something unmistakably Vanoni, a slight tremor of melancholy, a sense of intimacy, a whisper behind the words that suggested she was not just singing to an audience, but to one listener at a time. Her phrasing, her tone, her choices of songs, they all carried an emotional honesty that many musicians strive for but few ever truly master. Her signature hit, L'appuntamento the date, a 1970 adaptation of the Brazilian song Sentado à beira do caminho, became a classic. The melody, soft yet aching, paired with Vanoni's velvety captured the quiet ache of longing in a way that made listeners feel as though they were overhearing a private confession rather than a commercial recording. When she sang about waiting, about uncertainty, about the fragile hope that someone might come back, it struck a universal chord. People listened, not because they were fans of a genre, but because they recognized themselves in the lyrics. The track reached a new audience when it appeared in Steven Soderbergh's 2004 film Ocean's 12, introducing Vanoni to fans far beyond Italy. Suddenly, her voice drifted through international cinemas, attached to a film about charm, elegance, and a certain Italian coolness, all qualities deeply tied to Vanoni herself. Younger listeners began to search the song online, curious about the mysterious, haunting voice that felt both nostalgic and timeless. For many, it was a rare moment when a contemporary blockbuster unexpectedly opened a door to the past, allowing a new generation to discover a legend they'd never known they were missing. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed her sorrow following the news, paying tribute to Vanoni's unmistakable voice and her lasting contributions to Italian arts. On X, messages poured in from artists, politicians, actors, and ordinary people, proof that Vanoni had transcended the category of singer long ago. She had become a cultural anchor, a presence whose songs often accompanied the most personal and emotional milestones, weddings, heartbreaks, late-night drives, quiet afternoons, and moments of nostalgia. Public figures spoke of her elegance, fans spoke of her authenticity, fellow musicians spoke of her bravery, her willingness to reinvent herself, experiment, collaborate, and express emotion without shame. Born in 1934 in Milan, Vanoni was drawn to the arts from a young age. She was not a child raised for fame or molded deliberately for performance. Instead, she seemed to absorb creativity from the world around her. Milan, in the 1930s and 40s, was a city of complexity, war-torn, rebuilding, redefining itself, and within that environment, Vanoni's artistic spirit took root. She immersed herself in theater studies under Giorgio Strehler, one of Italy's greatest directors. Those who knew her in her formative years often said she carried herself less like an aspiring performer and more like someone who had already lived a dozen artistic lives. She had a natural magnetism, a combination of vulnerability and confidence that made people lean in when she spoke or sang. She began her career performing in small clubs and cafes before shooting to fame in 1961 with the timeless ballad Senza Fine. The song, whose title translates to endless, felt prophetic. It marked the beginning of a career that resisted boundaries, musical, emotional, and generational. The melody floated gently, but Vanoni's interpretation carried a kind of emotional gravity that transformed it into something enduring. Audiences were taken aback by the contrast. A young woman with a calm, almost whisper-like delivery, singing with the emotional depth of someone who had already tasted heartbreak, desire, and longing. The success of Senza Fine cemented her as a rising star, but more importantly, it introduced Italy to a voice that didn't just perform songs, it inhabited them. Around this time, she became romantically involved with Genovese singer-songwriter Gino Paoli, a relationship that also led to some of their most celebrated collaborations. Their love affair was intense, passionate, creative, and sometimes turbulent, exactly the type of artistic bond that produces unforgettable music. Paoli wrote songs that seemed to carry whispers of their shared life, while Vanoni interpreted them with an intimacy that suggested she was not acting or performing, but expressing lived experience. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was human, raw, filled with the tension of two strong artistic forces trying to coexist. And yet, the emotional friction between them was often alchemized into art. Even when their romance ended, their artistic connection remained iconic. Italy loves its musical legends, but it especially loves when music and life intertwine, and with Vanoni and Paoli, they were inseparable. Vanoni's talents extended beyond music. In 1964, she made her mark on Broadway with a role in the original production of Rugantino, showcasing her versatility as a performer. It was a bold leap for an Italian artist in an era when international transitions in entertainment were rare and often risky. But Vanoni's performance surprised American audiences, many of whom were unfamiliar with her. Her expressive acting, paired with her unmistakable voice, gave the show an unexpected depth. Those who worked with her in New York often recalled her professionalism, but also her playfulness, her curiosity, her willingness to experiment. She navigated cultural differences with grace, proving that artistry can transcend language, borders, and expectations. She continued to appear on television throughout her career, and even starred in the 2021 murder mystery film, 7 Women and a Murder, demonstrating her enduring appeal and dedication to her craft well into her later years. To act in film at nearly 90 speaks volumes. It wasn't simply about staying relevant. It was about refusing to shrink her world or limit her creativity. She still had energy, instinct, humor, and passion, and she wanted to keep working not because she needed the spotlight, but because art was oxygen to her. When audiences saw her in that film, poised, expressive, and still unmistakably herself, many were reminded that artistic spirit has no expiration date. She was known for blending traditional Italian melodies with jazz, pop, and bossa nova, creating a sound that was uniquely her own. This blend wasn't accidental. It was the result of Vanoni's lifelong curiosity about global music. She didn't want to be boxed into a single genre or identity. She wanted to explore the world through sound. She absorbed the softness of bossa nova, the emotional phrasing of jazz, the melodic purity of Italian songwriting, and fused them into a musical identity that was unmistakably Vanoni. Some critics at the time didn't know how to categorize her, but audiences understood, because emotion is borderless, and Vanoni always prioritized emotion over structure.